So we'll get started here. I wanted to thank everyone for coming out. It's our final seminar for the 2018-2019 seminar series. And as you know, the seminar series is meant to be informal discussions, provide graduate students, undergrad, community members, older adults. This year we were working on visual methods for knowledge exchange. And today I'm thrilled to have Émilie with us, Émilie Raymond, who's working, she's a professor at the University of Laval in social work and criminology. She teaches collective intervention, community organizing social action, part of many of the groups in Quebec, including Sirius, the Creches, etc. She works on social participation and age-friendly cities, and has long worked in the field of social and civic participation of seniors with disabilities. And Émilie was one of my first doctoral students, actually. So that's a pleasure. And is going on sabbatical next year. So I'm really pleased that you're here to talk about your work. And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amanda. Do you hear me well? Yes? And English is now my third language, so you will find that my accent is a bit challenging sometimes, but I will try to do my best. So I'm glad to be here to share some thoughts about how I use the photo novel method as part of a larger focus on the social participation of older people with disabilities. In my presentation, I will try to show that in telling stories of social participation crafted by older people with disabilities themselves and depicting them as experienced and capable protagonists, the photo novel creates a new iconography of aging, where older people with disabilities are insiders and not at the margins of the suggested trajectories of aging. I will start introducing the context and journey of the photo novel entre vous et nous. Then I will explore how the photo novel method, as a visual approach to data collection, generated innovative and transforming information related to the social participation of older people with disabilities. Two methodological aspects will be picked up to explain such a thing. First, the enterprise of cooperative storytelling, and second, the performativity embedded in the whole process. Finally, I will reflect on 4 issues I recommend to take into account when using this kind of method. Along my presentation, I will use as examples several photo novel stories and a couple of excerpts from a documentary film that captured the project. Participation is now commonplace in aging research, policy, and programs. Everywhere, older people's social participation is valued and promoted. Nowadays, however, the politics of participation are complicated. Participation is much more than a critical stance, leading to social involvement in public issues. From its use as a tool to fight urban poverty by President Johnson in the mid-60s United States, social and civic participation have been entrenched in post-welfare strategies. In new workfare states, for instance, citizens are considered as responsible partners, morally contributing to their community by means of self-control and healthy habits. In aging policy, currently, participation is constructed as a standard for active and successful aging. From the 2000s onward, and linked with the paradigm of successful aging, participation has become one of the principal strategies of international and national policy to face demographic aging. The United Nations 2002 report, for example, states that the expectation of older people and the economic needs of society demand that older persons be able to participate in the economic, political, social, and cultural life of their societies. The challenge, as the framework trickles down into policy guidelines and daily practices, is that disability is frequently framed as an impediment to, or even the opposite of participation. A significant tension exists between dominant discourses and the experiences of people with disabilities. Frameworks such as those of social participation are articulated at odds with disability in late life, with the experience of it often considered from a deficit perspective. At the same time, we know little about how older people themselves articulate and enact their participation in society, and much less from older people who are in more marginalized social positions. We also reflect little about the ambiguous definition of participation. We could be seen, by turns, as a revolutionist practice or as a regulatory norm. Since the concept is so heavily loaded, you could ask me, why do you work with it? And I would answer, because it means something to people. The idea and practice of participation is something meaningful that encourages dialogue. The idea behind our research was to occupy the concept of participation in something like a subversive way, reappropriating its content in terms of collective awareness and action. I will now introduce the participatory action research within which we use the photonovel method in order to collect and produce accounts of participation from the intersection of aging and lifelong physical disabilities. Participatory action research, or PAR, is considered as an approach that fits critical gerontology in terms of epistemology and methods. Beyond its many variations, PAR is about engaging people in the production of knowledge concerning problems affecting them, in order that they also be part of the solutions found. In PAR research, the concerned individuals and groups are centrally involved in co-producing knowledge through setting the research agenda, sharing power, sharing the understanding and the phenomenon in question, and producing solutions that are in line with their needs and realities. The photonovel project is a participatory action research that lasted 3 years. The aim of the project was first to allow other persons living with disabilities to share and discuss their stories, choices, and goals related to participation in late life. And second, to make their voices heard by policymakers, community-based services, and social movements. 12 older adults with physical disabilities took part in this collective writing project. The non-profit organization, Carrefour Familial des Personnes Handicapées, was the leading organization, while each group member was a long-standing member of the Carrefour or of one of the 2 other community groups for people with disabilities involved in the project. Members met over 30 group sessions to craft accounts based on their stories of participation in society. The writing was then followed by photo shoots, with the participants as the main actors, followed by a process whereby the graphic artists worked in collaboration with participants to select photos and phrases that would frame the stories. Once approved by the group, the collection of illustrated stories was produced in a glossy magazine. You'll find a couple of examples there. The document was then distributed to thousands of organizations and stakeholders, while participants transformed themselves into spokespersons. I will now dive into methodological aspects of the photonovel as a research method rooted in an emancipatory framework and grounded in a critical perspective on the study of aging and late life. As the researcher and activist Mike Oliver states it, photonovel participants were able to produce themselves differently. breaking up with dominant discourses that sustain people with disabilities, non-participation in society. Regarding the conditions for a meaningful and efficient cooperative storytelling process, I should remind you that we met over 30 times with the photonovel group, and this number does not include the smaller meetings organized around the refinement of one scenario or another. If the starting point of each story was an individual account, the narrative selected by the group for being part of the photonovel intensely resonated in the experience of several members. Consequently, the fashioning of all the scenarios ended being a rather powerful and liberating cooperative process, with members adding meaningful subtext and details in order to deepen the story being told. Let's enter into a first narrative, which tells of the spats between two older men with the bureaucratic healthcare system. The protagonist must use the wheelchair maintenance services provided by the public system, but in doing so, they feel deprived of control regarding the way adjustments are made. For participants, a long life with disabilities has meant an extended period of close relationship with plenty of administrative procedures. At the same time, members should themselves well prepared to face difficulties and conflicts at the carrefour of aging and disability. A long time ago, they started building individually fashioned models of support and developed their own version of independence. In terms of support systems, the concept of participation puts people with disabilities at the center of decision-making. For group members, participation in old age is all about maintaining the capacity to decide what their daily life and involvements should look like. The political struggle we are talking about reads this way: radical self-determination, not as heroes of any kind, but as average, normal people. This is virtually impossible because each participative experience requires extensive planning efforts regarding home care, accessibility, transportation, and technical aids. There is absolutely no place for improvisation or living in the moment. Participation is framed around possible arrangements more than meanings or preferences. Such pressure for self-preparation has a price. Huge feelings of frustration, despondency, anger, and often resignation. Such lively testimony about the way social participation, the provision of public services, and the feeling of dispossession are linked is entrenched in a shared and intimate conversation. This point is crucial in order for the cooperative storytelling to materialize. In our case, it meant devoting a great deal of time to accommodation needs regarding hearing, vision, and mobility issues, transforming our monthly meeting into a pleasant and significant event, and taking care of interpersonal relationship within the group. All this contributed to meetings felt as safe spaces where participants were keen and eager to involve in the making of the photo. Let's talk now about the second methodological aspect, the one of performativity. In this second narrative, two visually impaired older people reveal how technical aids can be used to ensure their social performance and inclusion in mainstream social settings. In depicting their technical aids in a naturalistic way, the characters frame and reframe a realistic and meaningful response to disability. They project a positively embodied image, where the technical aid is only a small part of the picture and not the center of attention. It is simply there. As such, the portrayals differ from the dominant notion of deficit, abnormality, or deformity that are projected onto them in daily life. They demonstrate a resistance and subversion of the dominant norms. This is true of both the final product and the process by which the images were created. In the sessions, participants fashion their own aesthetics. They try to find the best angle to picture a wheelchair, played with cinematographic codes, and debated the appropriate means of dress to portray their ideas. Such visual performance is representative of an attempt to challenge negative assumptions about their capacities. The images and roles expose, blur, and reinterpret the assigned identities of age and disability. The storyline presents older people with disabilities as average citizens, well prepared for the daily challenges and conflicts that exist. In other words, the segments do not depict older people as vulnerable, nor do they enact a rejection of their realities. Experience of participation for them take place in contexts that are often constrained by a lack of accommodation or limited interpretation of what it means to have impairment or use a technical aid in society. Indeed, many participants talked about the marginalization that they had experienced across the life course and into late life, processes that are deeply rooted in ideas of burden and dependency. Some participants discussed how even the accommodation they required are considered annoying. For example, adaptation could be seen as costly or slowing down the rhythm of activities to the detriment of able-bodied person. Such performativity could be seen as a kind of a rehearsal for a renewed participation of older people with disabilities in society. The territory of normal, optimal aging is extended, prompting us to revisit the politics of aging and disability, critically asking who is old and who is not, who is disabled and who is not. I will now describe 4 issues I consider important to take into account when using a visual method like the photo novel. The first issue is about the expectation of participants regarding the professionalism of the final product. The photo novel involved professional artists, 1 artistic director and writer, 1 illustrator, and 1 photographer. Let's see a short excerpt from the project documentary film which stages their contribution to the project. Okay, so I will now try a technical. Okay. It's very short. It's just to show you that we will work together. It's in French, so just.
Le carrefour familial des personnes handicapées présente force et fragilité. Vivre et vieillir avec un handicap. Sylvie Nicolas, directrice artistique et éditoriale.
Vous êtes à l'image de la confiance et de l'énergie que vous avez investie pour vous sentir libre dans vos vies le plus possible.
Je me crois qu'on les met à court de dos, marchant vers l'avenir, que là c'est beau. Là,
c'est pas l'eau rose dans l'idée,
Mais ce qu'on voit surtout, c'est vraiment la posture et le regard qui est posé en même temps sur cette pierre. Et c'est vrai que la croix naturelle noire, il y a quelque chose là-dedans de fort, ça parle de la photo. C'est comme si ça nous renvoie quelque chose. C'est vraiment beau.
Séance photo au cimetière.
J'ai vécu des choses extraordinaires. Je ne peux pas les revivre aujourd'hui parce que j'ai plus la capacité physique due à l'usure de tout mon handicap. Et là, quand tu arrives en plus l'âge, ben là, tu en perds joliment de tes capacités. Si je m'arrêtais à ça, là, bon, je m'installerais dans un coin, puis ça vaut plus la peine d'essayer d'avoir de l'espoir. Je veux encore avoir du plaisir à vivre.
Okay, so available on the internet if you are interested. So the decision of hiring professional artists was taken by the partner organization and highly approved by participants. These ones expressed they didn't want to be caricaturized or depersonalized within the visual component of the photo novel project. They sensed being accompanied by professionals was protecting them from this danger. As a community organizer, I was quite ambiguous about the coming of someone called artistic director within our group, where we were trying to work from a more democratic stance. It sounded to me that maybe we would lose some of our freedom or ownership. However, because I was the only one with this opinion, I gave up and decided to support participants' views. I guess determining if professional artists will integrate the visual method process or if homemade operations will be preferred is an important step. It conveys issues related to the property of the whole editing process, personal and social expectations regarding which kind of images are admissible and intelligible, and of course, money for professional wages and equipment. In the case of the photo novel Entre vous et nous, I should say most of the participants just loved the final product and felt it perfectly suited the stories they wanted to tell. For my part, with insight, I also think incorporating professional artists was a good decision for this project. But I would recommend including them in the whole process as co-researchers and not as external experts. It seems to me that similar methodological choices would be more current with the standpoint inherent to a co-writing project. The second issue is related to the delicate balance between true stories and collective stories. I already explained that each of the photo novel accounts was rooted in the life of one participant, but was subsequently nurtured and modified by the group. For example, let's examine this story, where two older women with disabilities meet at the shopping center. One is a frequent user of public assisted transportation and explains the advantages of this system to the other woman. The idea interests the visually impaired lady, who comments that this could help her feel less like a burden for her family. When the daughter returns, their interaction between her and her mother shows overprotective attitudes. The daughter ends by saying that she is the one responsible for caring for her mother. This storyline allowed participants to put words and images on something frequently unspoken in social care, the mitigating impact of protective or even authoritarian behaviors on the potential for social participation. All participants in the group had plenty of examples to share about such function, which generally remains unsaid because disclosure presents risk for interpersonal and care relationships. Consequently, the narrative process undertook for this topic had to be both genuine and anonymous. The initial testimony was gradually transformed in order to remove too personal details and add relevant information coming from other participants' experiences. The final result is a thriving and awareness-raising account of how day-to-day life and social participation of older people with disabilities may be constrained by protective behaviors. The third issue talks of the life testimony embedded in some of the accounts. Together, the narrative from the photo novel project make evident the irreconcilability that can exist between guiding frameworks on participation that are oriented around independence and success, and the forms of participation enacted by some people with disabilities. As such, the project created the possibility for a new landscape of participation, where practices were framed around self-determination and personal meanings, rather than focused on the dominant notions of physical activity or productivity. Participants repeatedly discussed how their social participation was not representative of a decrease in participation, but as an evolution in the way they choose to participate. Disability influences the means and practices of participation, but not always as expected. Their accounts demonstrate how participation is invented and reinvented over time as people continue to cope with unsuitable environments and challenging health conditions. The resounding message was that participation can provide a pathway to preserve capability and vitality through opportunities and connection with citizenship and social life. Several participants also spoke about how disability made them age faster than others, and how the experience of bodily impairment could impact their participation in different ways. For instance, in some cases, participants felt that they had to restrict some of their activities in order to preserve their remaining capabilities. Those two personal stories illustrate how André and Christian envision their aging process and future. Both of them are dead by now, like almost half of the photo novel group. They were right. Disability makes you age quite fast. At least their testimony remains and offer a vibrant call to the right of being part of society up to the end. The final issue I wanted to consider with you is about the horizon for social change driving the photo novel project. In this narrative, we follow the adventure of an older man using a wheelchair trying to take part in municipal recycling efforts despite inadequate layout. Here, the topic of recycling conveys the notion that participation generates connection with broader issues, such as environmental conservation. Indeed, photonovel participants express the desire to be included in social debates and participative opportunities that extend beyond groups for people with disabilities. Participants wanted their social identities, rather than their trajectories of disability, to be at the core of the participative storylines. On the road to social inclusion, access to participatory spaces was always an issue for participants. Having physical disabilities creates difficulties, both environmental and symbolic, to obtain access to older people organizations like leisure clubs, volunteer activities, or involvement in activism. Rather than impairment in itself, it is the way disability is constructed and managed in society that generates disruptions and tensions in the social participation of older people with disabilities. The photonovel shows it very clearly. Mentalities and infrastructures have to change in order for people with disabilities to have full access to participation. I will now conclude my presentation with a couple of remarks. The photonovel project explored participation from the perspectives of older people with disabilities. As a collective restoring process, the primary purpose of the photonovel project was to understand participation from the intersection of old age and disability, and raise awareness about the lives and experiences of older people with disabilities. It also created results in a unique format that could be shared with decision makers and the public in general, in order to draw attention to the inherent challenges of guiding discourses on participation. A key finding from the members of the photonovel project is how frameworks such as participation, when not carefully integrative of the needs of diverse groups, can exclude rather than include in programs, services, and organizations that target the social participation of older people. The involvement of people aging with disabilities in a participatory research on social participation created a dialogue, provided detailed insights about neglected realities, and resulted in a transformative process. Here, changes emerge from shared story, from the ways in which participants fashion and perform their vision of participation. The photo novel members saw themselves as insiders, as producers of intention, meanings, and changes, as concerned, skilled, and connected citizens who fully challenge the weakness and passivity that exist about them within policy, scientific, and media representation. As such, the photo novel blurred and fractured the assigned identities related to age and impairment, providing room to creatively shape innovative, participative identities, aspirations, and commitments. Thank you very much.
An excellent example of the visual methods, and you have a room full of people who are working in similar related areas. So turn the floor over for questions, thoughts, questions about process, topic.
Hi. Should we just start with the
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Please do.
I'm from humanities, and I do some work with aging and participation through the Mirror Group here on campus. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the process that you use to create the community and build that trust that you were talking about, whether you sort of co-create rules of engagement or what you do.
Yeah. We started our journey just meeting together, and we needed a lot of time in feeling, I think, something like confidence. And the confidence, trust, yeah, that's better. The trust came after all people being able to access the room and feel respected regarding their accommodating needs. Because there were 5 or 6 wheelchairs, people requiring, how do you call it in English? L'interprétariat for interpreters. Deaf people require, and we had to get used to that as a group, talking to, not to the interpreter, but to the person. And blind people too had to get used to how to get to the organization, all that stuff. And we had very long break time just to be able to know each other and talk about who we were. Because in Quebec, and I don't know if it's the same thing in Ontario, the politics of disability are disability related. So the movement of deaf people is something, the movement of blind people is another thing, and the people are not working together. At the contrary, there's a lot of anger because people could feel that the other type of disability are more lucky than they are because they receive that kind of services and all that stuff. So it took a while before being able to enter into our stories or into the collective storytelling. And when people felt safe and okay with that, we started with individual stories. So we asked people just to think about participative stories or examples or experience. And they were able to think or write about that in their own, by themselves, alone. And we started hearing some stories from people who felt okay with that. We were ready to share examples. And we didn't talk about social life or leisure activities at the beginning. We just started with end-of-life issues because it appeared that for people, talking about social participation was talking about self-determination and will I be able to live my old time the way I want to live, to experiment it. And yeah, so it was a very intimate process. People talking about end of life, assisted suicide issues. It was a very personal conversation. And they shared the feeling that they didn't have any place to express that because it was complicated with their partner or children because it was talking about something very constraining, the feeling that they will lose the meanings of deciding for themselves. And social participation was primarily about that. And then we entered into the way you could be connected with others, social activities. I don't know if I answered that question. Comment, your experience about visual mental?
I missed a large part of your presentation, and I apologize, so my question might be repetitive. Based on how you responded to the question about end of life being a dominating conversation, is that because of the average age of the participants? Because certainly, you know, we have an increasingly young definition of being older or elderly.
Yeah.
55 is that where it starts, sadly, for some of us. So was your age group actually into the elderly range?
Yeah.
That,
I mean, we could have a look at the table I presented, but the average age was quite low. I mean, but people talked a lot about that they felt they were aging faster than everybody. And something that was tricky about age and disability is that because there were people with lifelong disability, so within the Quebec public healthcare system, up to 65, they got some kind of services that they would lose after 65. So that was a big issue for everyone. But I talked, maybe you heard that half of the group is gone by now because they had very heavy health issues. And yeah, their life ended very quickly and at a young age. Yeah, so that was their reality. Even if everybody has the desire to live a long, even longer life, they all have projects. They wanted to see their grandchildren. No.
it's a separate question. I actually sit on the Hamilton City's subcommittee for accessibility for persons with disabilities. So it's 14 people from the community, all with a variety of disabilities. And given that we have so many resources, never enough, but so many resources devoted to disability and participation, accessibility, the whole realm that way. I'm interested in how you see your PhD research being transferred into policy and practice.
I mean, in Quebec, you mean?
Well, anywhere. I am assuming you've done it with McMaster. So, no.
No, at the McGill University.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm now based in Quebec, and I'm responsible for a research team called Inclusive Cities by now, so I'm in a good position to work about that kind of issues. I would say in Quebec is quite complicated on the provincial policy level to have an impact at this time, because aging and disability politics are so different and so are very are handled by very different not organization but direction within the health minister. It's quite different on a municipal level, yeah, where the city of Quebec had decided to merge disability and aging policy together. So it's an interesting starting point, but it created a lot of fights and quarrels within both of the movements, with representative of older people not wanted to be associated with disability people, yeah, and disability, but in a lesser measure, and disability activists not wanted to be merged with older people organization. So we have a common plan of action for the city of Quebec by now, but translating the politics into action is quite challenging at this time. Yeah. So we are still in a period of talking together and trying to see how we could manage this at the concrete level. Yeah. Is that answering your question?
It does very much, and I'd like to offer that it's similar in this problem.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but I was just thinking about an event that I know is going on that a lot of people here might be interested in. The faculty communities is having an event called Defying Barriers on May 15th that's open to trainees and faculty. It will be at the Spice Factory. We're going to have a couple of speakers come in and speak about art and accessibility to art. And if anybody's interested in it, give them information. It's a half-day workshop. It's culminating an opportunity to think about research questions in this space.
I was just curious about how you disseminate your research, like in what capacity, is it into communities, like the community awareness? I'm not sure that's not. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, so, but when you had advances, I guess I'm trying to be a little more specific. I know you've done this, excellent representation, but, and what kind of, like, how large a response have you received?
Yeah. With the photo novel, we did a lot of community forums and presentation, always with the participants, and we went to the CAG, to the Congress of Canadian Association of Shelters with the group. This was a word experience for all of us. We were presenting in French, nobody was understanding French, and they told me, never more. Yeah, we will just keep with community events. Yeah, it's interesting actually when you do participatory research and you want to go to conferences with co-researchers. Yeah, the cultural differences quite large. So yeah, so we presented in both the older people and disability organization. We animated some atelier workshop about how to what to do now with this kind of result, what we can do. And another thing I'm now doing without this group, yeah, because the research and I'm now working on the other part. I'm doing a part with the community group of older people, trying to get the organization more inclusive of older people with disabilities. So it's I thought it was the following step, because something had to be done in order for people with disabilities to feel more included and more welcome in other people organization. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It's really compelling. I'm Kristen Ding, I'm in the School of Social Work here. And Catherine and I, in her school, have been engaged with the project around using theater techniques to think through some questions about participation in the sense of participation in public discourse. And I have so many questions about work, but one thing I'd like to hear you talk about is, and you threaded this through, but could you talk a little bit more about the particular significance of this form for doing this work, the photo novel form, for doing the kind of work you wanted to do with this group of people? What did it make possible?
Yeah.
What were the limitations?
Sorry.
What did it make possible?
Yeah.
And then what did
Okay.
it also constrain?
Yeah. I think the first thing it made possible was to people reflect about their own vision of participation and their own experiences. Instead of starting from the dominant imagery about participation, they were asked to think about how they do see their participation in society. And not only as older person, because we talked about their participation along their whole life. They always had been struggling against complicated settings and conditions for participation. But they are not often asked to take it. They don't have often space to talk about that with other people maybe experiencing similar difficulties. And it was very compelling for them to share their stories or experiences, because I think they felt solidarity and acceptance for their stories, while often they were not even asked to tell that kind of stories. It was also challenging and interesting for them to recreate a new story which other people experiences around what is important when you are aging with disabilities. So the final account was kind of a collective result about what does it mean and what is important when you experiment that situation. And I would say the most interesting about photo novel was about the images. The thinking about the scenarios and how we will translate the stories into images. And we got a lot of testimonies about the fact of showing different bodies, showing different ways of standing with a white stick, for example, or showing the hearing aid for people that didn't have shown their hearing aid never. It was the first time they accepted to show something of their body, but they felt eager to do it because they were, it was very important for them to put other images into the public spaces about bodies and aging and disability. Yeah. But this requires a lot of intimacy, because, and with the photographer, with the whole group, because it was exposing yourself and trying to expose yourself in a way you felt, you should feel proud of you in some way. I don't explain myself very well on this point, but yeah, but it was powerful. And for that, I think having professionals with us helped get nice images, and people felt very proud. And we had a big event at the end to just present our work, and all the families were there, and you felt that the proud of the people involved in the project. Yeah. But it also, during the photo shoot, I was always there, almost always there, and I had sometimes a social work practice to enter in, because people require to talk about that. The fact of showing a body or technical aid that usually they just hide. Yeah. They normally or usually they want this to be absent. Yeah. Yeah. So is it a mention?
Can I just actually follow up? It's something that, and I completely forgot. Who came up with the idea of the photo novel? Like and what did that discussion look like in the beginning to kind of, to get behind that?
Yeah, I had the idea of the photo novel. We were talking about a way of showing our stories with images and text. That was very important. And I had that idea, intuition in the metro in Montreal. I don't know how. A photo novel. And I proposed it to the group, and we bought the last photo novel that were on the market at the beginning of the project, because now it's very difficult to find this well-known, popular literature. Yeah, and they just agreed. They were very excited with that idea of producing short stories. It was kind of accessible for people, and it was exciting to think about 12 or 10 stories to be told. So it was also a good way of allowing several stories to be told. Yeah. The story of the idea of the photo novel. And that kind of literature was part of their story. Yeah. Ladies in the group said, I was doing that, so yeah. And we have always that inside joke about being not too romantic, because usually we are so romantic, but we have one account of where there is a flower.
I'm wondering, the presentation is easily accessible to the people with hearing impairment and the participants with hearing impairment and those with mobility impairment, but not to those with visual impairment. So how is that people with visual impairment?
And we were joking a lot about that. And in the documentary, one of the blind people, Real, said that it was very nice, all the project, but I didn't see anything. So it's interesting because we try to find ways of making the process accessible for him. For example, we decided at some point how the story will be told. For example, when you do a comic, you have to decide the number of the panel, the square, It's very important because rhythm of the comics is about that. So we took those decisions together, and we prepared frames with, it's very difficult to explain that in English for me, but something that the blind people could feel and to sense the different way of organizing the rhythm aspect of the comic. So they could decide, okay, for that story, I'd rather prefer just have one because it's an important images. For the other one, I'd rather prefer to have 8, for example, picture to represent a quicker movement in the story. So it was one way we try to get to give access to the process for blind people. But there was a lot of joke between us about all that topic of different disabilities. And it was interesting for people too to discover when you are in a wheelchair, you could feel that people with hearing or visual impairment are, I don't know, lucky because it, yeah, you know, so just talking about how do you handle with daily challenges, with really interesting for people. It was like a discovery, a journey about disability after 60, 70 years in your kind of own social movement. Yeah, it was transformative, I would say. Yeah.
Merci pour la présentation. I'm Raymond from the School of the Arts. So I work with Chris, she said, so my art form is mostly theater and live performance. I'm a little intrigued about how you worked with the artist. So you said you brought the artist in later in the process?
Yeah.
Not right at the beginning?
Yeah. For me, it was really complicated at the beginning. Yeah, because and the artistic director wanted to be called artistic director. It's okay. It's another world. I was not that experienced in, and I think there's a lot of ways of working with art. Not the only one. But that's that for me. That was the most important step. One of the most important steps for me as a researcher in the project. Just to add, that was tricky as a because we were in a part of the participatory action research process. So I had to negotiate about that and to give up in that case because yeah, it was about people feeling of being well accompanied. They just feel that that was the right way of doing things. And one lady once told me, I want to take picture. I'm not interested in taking picture. I want to think about that, but I won't learn how to do this, all that stuff. So it was interesting. But if I do that again in my life, I will do it. But I will try to integrate the artists from the beginning, to build trust with them at the beginning, to build trust between participants and me and the artist. Yeah, I think it would have been preferable. Yeah, to share a common sense of what was the part about, how we would work together, for example, etc. So, yeah, that would be my advice about that. Yeah. But I think you, as a researcher doing part, you have to change your way of doing research. I think for artists, it's the same thing. Yes. In that case, they had, and they really well, they collaborated very well in that sense. And they were very involved in all the aspects of the project. So my fears didn't realize. I think it's a great project.
So join me in